And welcome to the new folks. And let us know. We'll start in just a few moments. Let us know where you're joining us from.
We have here Zahir Faruqi saying he's tuning in from Peachtree City, Georgia, about 35 miles south of Atlanta. Welcome. Glad you're here, Zahir. Right.
All right. Well, we're going to start, and people will continue to join us. We're very pleased that you're all joining us today for this webinar, sponsored by the Khalifa Consulting firm doing business in the Arab world, Secrets to Success. This is, if we're living in a very trying time, I can't imagine anything any time in my life, at least, that has been more difficult and more challenging, and things happening in different ways, from the COVID pandemic to the racial unrest and just the turbulence in the world today. So as we sort of start this conversation, it's time to take a deep breath and honor the memories of those we have lost, and know that this kind of work of building bridges of cultural understanding is one of the ways that we work to make the world a better place. And I'm delighted that you're all joining us to do that today. My name is Judy Marks. I am working with Khalifa Consulting. I'll be doing some facilitation today. My job is to manage the room and to help facilitate the questions. There are a couple of rules we just want to go over with you. Khalifa, before I do that, and you'll hear much more about Khalifa Consulting as we go through this webinar, but Khalifa Consulting is a network, an international network really, of top-of-the-line consultants who do work specifically in cross-cultural training, executive coaching, team building, leadership development, and those kinds of programs that really help corporations excel in different parts of the world. So for today's webinar, I'm going to keep your microphone on mute. By all means, if you need to, you can stop your video so that you're not distracted by that, if that works for you. Please use the chat function for questions. I will be facilitating those questions and sending them on to Soumaya and to Sandy. And we'll work through that way. We're also recording this the session so that you'll have access to it later on through the Khalifa Consulting website, which is khalifa.consulting. And please stay focused, join in. We want to learn from you and hear from you, and stay connected to you also. So I am delighted to introduce to you Soumaya Khalifa, who is oops, 1 second, that went back. Sorry about that. Soumaya is a world-renowned trainer and consultant. She has had experience in corporate human resources, developing trainings for diversity and diversity inclusion programs. She is an MBA in human resources. I don't have to, you will know by just shortly into the conversation with her how truly exceptional Soumaya is. She's written and contributed to books. She's published all the time and is very well known in Atlanta, particularly for having created one of the best community building organizations in town, the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Atlanta. She's been featured in the New York Times, in Al Jazeera, and because I just have to add, as it's up here on the bullet point, she loves to travel, loves being with friends, family, and likes shopping. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen and pass this on to Soumaya, and we'll begin a phenomenal discussion.
Judy, thank you so much. Thank you all again for being with us this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on where you are in the world. Today we're going to be talking about Arab culture, and I'm going to be asking questions of Sandy. Sandy is a great friend and a client, and we've been working together for many years. And so I wanted to pick Sandy's brain and share that with you all as as we talk today about Arab culture. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview, and then we'll get in conversation with Sandy. So I want to start off with a story, and it's a true story. And the story is of a major soft drink company, and it went into an Arab country, and they decided that they're going to increase their market share. They came up with a brilliant marketing campaign, and the marketing campaign was they had three pictures: a picture of a man who was very, very tired, and then the second picture was with him drinking a can of their soda or Coke or whatever you call it. And then after he drank that drink, he was running in the desert really in great shape. And they were so excited about their marketing plan. They took it to market, and guess what happened? They did not get the market share. They lost the market share. And the reason is that people in the Arab world read from right to left. So their best campaign ever was received as somebody was in excellent health. They were running in the desert, ready to go, full of energy, full of life. They drank their drink, and then they became very tired. So it was counterproductive. And had they known more about the culture, more about how people look at advertisements, etc., they would have saved themselves a lot of heartache and a lot of money and bad publicity. So keeping that in mind, let's look at what is culture? You know, we say we're going to talk about the Arab culture and how it impacts business, but the definition of culture, there are many definitions. And the definition that I want to share today with you, it's the shared ways that people see the world through. How they understand it, how they interpret the world. And if you look at it, we all have those lenses. We have a lens from which we see the world, and that is our cultural lens. Just to give you an example, when people shake hands, you know, you have Japanese who don't shake hands, they bow. And so different parts of the world do things differently. And I like to say culture is like an onion. It's many, many layers, many layers. And we need to look at all the different layers and what they mean, and what do they mean to us in business. And I also like to say that, like an onion, culture could make us cry as well if we don't understand it. When we look at culture and look at an iceberg, we say culture is like an iceberg. And all the folks who are on this call who are interculturalists, I'm sure you all use this or something close to this. When we go into a country, we see what's on top of the waterline. We see people's behavior, we see how they dress, how they interact with each other, etc. But below the waterline is really what moves what's above the waterline. What do people believe in? What do they value? What are their customs? What are their traditions? What assumptions do they make? And when we see another person's culture, we tend as human beings take the behavior that we observe and take it onto our own filter through our own glasses and trying to make sense out of it. So I'll give you an example. When people in the United States talk or they communicate, what is really important is to make eye contact, because eye contact tells people that, hey, I am sure of myself. I know what I'm doing. I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. So when I or anyone who does not do eye contact in different cultures, and they talk to an American, the interpretation goes through their lenses. They're hiding something. They're not being truthful. They're not sure of themselves. While if we look at their own culture, it's probably because of respect. They're not looking a person in the eye directly. So when we work with different cultures, there are 4 stages of cultural awareness. The first one is unconscious incompetence. And this is when the person does not know anything about what's going on. They're totally oblivious to it. And we call that a state of blissful ignorance. The next state is when people understand there are differences, but they just don't know how many and how deep. All right? The third level is conscious competence. They know about the differences. They're trying to adjust or trying to bridge that gap, but it does not come totally naturally. They have to work at it. And then the fourth one, this is the unconscious competence, where people just go on autopilot and know when to act a certain way with certain people. And I like to give an analogy of a small child who has lived in a bilingual, bicultural culture home. And in that situation, for instance, in my own household, a 2 or 3-year-old will know how to speak Arabic to certain people and speak English to others. So that could also be done with cultures. So this is a little bit of an overview about culture and what it is. And then I want to define what is the Arab world. The Arab world are 22 countries, mostly in Northern Africa and in Western Asia. And what ties all those countries together is the language that they speak, which is Arabic. And also they have a lot of shared values, such as family, such as relationship, etc. And all those 22 countries belong to an organization called the Arab League, which is similar to the United Nations, except it was founded before the United Nations was. And in terms of all these people, they are very diverse. They're different ethnicities, etc. So that is the Arab world. For when we work with clients in the intercultural world, we work on, first of all, having self-awareness. Where am I culturally? How do I act? What do I do? And learning about the people that we are working with. What are their cultural norms? And for the intercultural world, we have something called cultural dimensions. This is the foundation for which we are able to define culture and to be able to speak about it. And the things that you see on the right and the left, these are different spectrums. And the US and the Saudi Arabia right here, they are mapped onto those cultural dimensions. And as you can see, they're opposite. And so if I get up and I want to work in Saudi Arabia and my orientation is very US, and to try to work with colleagues who come from different cultural backgrounds, see the world through different lenses, then there will be breakdown in communication. And in business, that could be very costly. I want to pick one of those cultural dimensions, and that's the last one, task and relationship focus. Relationship cultures such as Saudi Arabia, they want to build trust with people that they work with. They want to spend a lot of time getting to know the person, getting to know about their family, about what do they like, not like, about their business, about everything about them. When you look at the US, however, the US culture is more task-oriented. Let's get down to business. Trust is automatically given. And at the end of the day, after we do business and we're successful, we could be friends, but that's not mandatory. So you see, this is something that is very important, and we'll come back to it several times. Here's another tool. The tool that I've shared before is called Globe Smart. Another tool that we use at Khalifa Consulting is the Cultural Wizard by RW3. Again, it depicts all the different cultural dimensions, and it shows the US in the US is shown here in green, and Saudi Arabia, for the sake of comparison, is in the orange. And again, you see the difference in all those cultural dimensions. All right, so now, giving you that background, we're moving into having a conversation with the incredible Sandy Bates. Sandy's a client of Khalifa Consulting. We've worked with her for many years to help in coaching and training of her employees, both here in the US as well in Saudi Arabia. She's a trusted leader. She is a visionary leader. She's a leader that has a lot of compassion and sympathy and empathy to all her teams. And it is wonderful to see leaders such as Sandy, who she really cares about her people. And Sandy, welcome. We're so glad you're here. And we want to learn from you. We want to ask you questions. I'll ask you questions, but I also want our audience to ask questions in the chat and let us know what you're thinking about. What questions do you have for Sandy? So I have a few questions to get us going, but again, we're looking forward to getting your questions as well. So Sandy, to start out with, many leaders think that, hey, I am successful doing whatever I'm doing. I have a successful team, say in the US. I could just pick up and go anywhere in the world and just drop in and start a business and just be as successful. What do you think about that statement?
Well, first of all, thank you for all those kind words, Soumaya. I truly appreciate it. Soumaya has been an amazing help in coaching our employees and helping us to see the differences that each culture can bring and how great it can be to form a team that has so many commonalities, but differences that bring us and make us even stronger. So with that, but to answer your question, I kind of thought that way myself to begin with. I'm a people person. How can I not, be successful in those areas? And that truly is a misperception. And if I'm being frank, it would be devastating to go into a different culture with that mindset. Because we think we're good leaders, we think we're good people or people oriented, and it should be easy, but that's really not the case. When doing business in a different country, it is so very important to understand their values and what really makes them who they are, what drives them, and to learn the culture of that country. You really need to know that in order to integrate yourself. Just as you mentioned earlier about the US and someone coming to the US, the expectation would be they're going to look me in the eye, kind of thing. Same thing when you go to a different culture. The expectation is that you're going to integrate to their mindset for a while. But it helps you to really understand so that you can build on a common ground.
Thank you, Sandy. You and your leadership team reached out to Khalifa Consulting and said, hey, we're doing business in Saudi Arabia. We need to get cultural training. Can you help us? And we had long conversations, and we started working together. What led you to say, hey, we need cultural training?
Oh my gosh. Well, we were desperately looking for assistance. We were experiencing cultural issues on both sides. I was getting a lot of comments from the US team that the Saudi Arabia team, they're not responsive. They don't, they put way too much fluff in their emails, and they just bog me down with all this fluff and don't give me answers I need. And then you call over the KSA or to Saudi Arabia, and they would say, oh my gosh, those people, they don't care about me. It's just always work, 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 work. There was we couldn't find that common ground. And it was really starting to impact our customer and, quite frankly, the bottom line, because we weren't delivering as quickly as we needed to deliver.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember being in the training, and your engineer said, I get 2 pages worth of an email asking me about my health and about my family and about this and this and how's the weather and how is, and they said, I just don't have time for this. And I remember when we did the Saudi Arabian culture, U.S. cultural training there, the Saudis said, it's very disrespectful for me when I get an email from someone saying Project XYZ provide update. And so, yeah, I remember that very vividly. And both sides had, a very clear examples
Sure.
of why the breakdown was in communication.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think what happened then, what happened? I think y'all created a hybrid culture of what's acceptable and how does each team kind of talk to each other.
Right. We don't want to lose our individuality, of each other, but we want to be respectful of those areas as well. And, a lot of the folks in the U.S. We're never going to go to Saudi Arabia and vice versa. So we want to make sure they could actually communicate and have a strong working relationship. And so part of that was, thanks to some of your direction, was really, hey, it could be as simple as, hope you are doing well, kind of thing. A couple of small sentences to your Saudi Arabia counterparts that just says more than just the bottom line. And then on the other side of that was asking the folks in Saudi Arabia to maybe fine tune the way they were doing things a little bit so that they still were showing that they cared about the individual and building that relationship. But we were also able to bullet point exactly what our needs were or our response was to a previous email. So it worked out great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sandy, it's being a woman and being a leader such as yourself, and I know you traveled to Saudi Arabia many times. So talk to us about the experience, perceptions before you left to Saudi Arabia, What was your experience there, and how were you perceived as a woman leader? Because that question comes out a lot about being a woman and leading in Saudi Arabia or any other country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is different. I mean, we need to be honest and transparent to realize that there are differences, and we need to make sure we're aware of those so we can manage through them. Initially for me, I was communicating via remote. I was in the US, they were in Saudi Arabia. I was waiting to get visas and all that stuff before I could actually visit. And I found that a lot of times my emails or my communications, my calls were not being even taken seriously, or they were going unresponded. They were not responded to. So it took our CEO kind of putting out there that, because they're very hierarchical, and that she had to go out there and say, she is in charge of our human resources globally. This is what she'll be doing, and this is the expectation, kind of thing. She had to set that groundwork for me going in there. Once I got there and was able to spend time with my team on the ground in Saudi Arabia, it really became about just building those relationships, making sure, it goes back to kind of the email thing, making sure that I wasn't just focused on, I'm the boss and you need to follow my direction, or here's the plan and here's how I'm going to have you execute it. It was more about, let me get to know you as an individual and gain some insight to what really makes them tick, what's really important to them as an individual, but as also from a cultural perspective as well.
Wonderful. So you leverage the relationship building.
Absolutely. I think that you have to do that in order to be successful in the majority of the Middle Eastern cultures, but especially in Saudi Arabia, because it is very conservative. And as a woman, like for example, in Saudi Arabia, there are certain positions that must be held by a male, and it must be a Saudi that holds it. So when you already have those guidelines, you're really restricted as to what you can do sometimes. So how do I make sure I'm going to get what I need? And that's all about relationship building. I remember one particular situation where one of my employees had said to me, I'd like for you to come visit my family. And he asked me at the end of one of my first visits, and I said, oh, sure. Next time I'm in town, we'll make that happen. I really thought no more about it, honestly, because that was my US mindset. Oh yeah, kind of thing. But the next visit I had, he approached me again and said, okay, would Thursday be good for you? And I was like, what? And so he invited me to his house. I met his family, got out this huge spread and welcomed me into their home. That's huge. That's not something that they take lightly. You don't just become a part of, get invited to their home unless they have really accepted you and you've built that relationship. So that kind of helped me realize that I'd kind of won that battle a little bit, that they were more accepting of me. And I've been gone from that company for several years. And to this day, that gentleman still reaches out to me. As a matter of fact, he let me know the birth of his son not long ago. And it just gives you a sense of pride in knowing that not only was I able to build a relationship that helped me when I was in that position, but I've been able to maintain and sustain that relationship going forward. And it does help to bridge that cultural gap that we do sometimes experience.
Can you give us an example, Sandy? This is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Can you give us an example of a situation that really, because of your relationship with the people there, how that impacted the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of one in particular. We were having some struggles with our medical provider there in the Middle East. And so I'd gone over to negotiate some things. And as part of that, I'd asked my human resources manager to join in that conversation. Well, when we got into the meeting, he kind of took over and he became very angry and, was telling the vendor, you will do these and this is what's going to happen and blah, blah. And I could tell that it was really not going very well. And so at that point I thought, okay, I've got to make sure that I'm using this knowledge that I have of their culture and what you, and thankfully you and I had also talked about how do I make sure that I build relationships, but at the same time, I don't release full control of my power, you know, kind of thing. And so I had to interject and I had to stop him and basically say to this gentleman, I appreciate what you're trying to say here, but I think that's something you and I can talk about later. Right now, let's focus on this. And this is the direction I want this conversation to take. I had to be that direct and kind of thing, but I was able to work with him. We talked to the vendor. He got his opinion of why things were happening the way they were and what we could do differently. And then I was able to circle back around to my HR manager and say, why don't you, what is your opinion of this? Let's hear what you're thinking now. Kind of, and so more control that environment and that situation. And it really helped us. In the end, we were able to save some money on our medical plans, which was always a nice thing.
That's a great example. Thank you so much. I got a question here, and it says, what's the story behind that picture? You got a picture back there, so tell us the story behind it.
I do. My Highland Bull there, you know, kind of thing. I moved into a new home back in the fall, and my team here in Tennessee decided to give me that as a housewarming gift. And the reason they chose that was they think of me as, sometimes I'm the bull because I'm, their words were that I've got their back and I don't mind fighting the battle kind of thing. But then the hair on the bull, as you see it, also because I'm also fun and a little bit crazy and can, you know, have fun along the way as well. So that was their tribute to me. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. You know, I was just thinking though, as I'm sitting here talking to you about it, that probably would be very inappropriate in an Arab culture. You wouldn't want to give someone in an Arab culture a picture of an animal, I don't believe, because I think that would almost be saying that they are equivalent to an animal, and it's very disrespectful in those terms. Here, I loved it, and obviously it has a place in my home, yeah, that's the story. And I you know, you just have to be careful. It goes back to culture. Sometimes it's acceptable, sometimes it's not.
Absolutely. So this is nuanced, right? So for you as a U.S. American, that was just lovely. It was something that you're proud of, that your team loves you enough to give you that kind of a picture. But within an Arab culture, that would be, like you said, a very big insult, comparing you to an animal. So yeah, a very interesting comment here. We have another question here from Mona. Mona says, Sandy, what Arab cultural aspect felt like the most hard to accept for you? Was there something that you ran into that was hard to accept? Great question, Mona.
That is a great question. And, you know, it's probably not as big of a thing that you would think, but for me, the hardest thing for me to deal with when I was there is, things have changed now, by the way. Yes. It's a little bit different, but when I first arrived in Saudi Arabia, I couldn't drive. I couldn't go outside of my hotel compound really without an escort. Mm-hmm. And as a woman, I was kind of offended by that. You know, I should be able to, if I want to run down to the local mall, I should be able to run down to the local mall without checking in with anyone. And at first that was kind of difficult, but then I had to take a step back and realize that this is not about trying to prevent me from doing something. It's about me understanding where they're coming from and just kind of integrating myself again. I keep using that term, integrating myself into their culture. So once I started getting used to it, I actually liked it. I'd call back home and go, hey, I have a driver. I have someone who's taking me here. And of course they would tease me here and go, don't get used to that. We're not going to baby you that way here. But that was it. I mean, honestly, it was just, when you first arrive, you do feel very limited in what you can do as an individual.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure other things, like you mentioned, that there's a lot of change happening now in Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi experience a few years back is not the Saudi experience now. And it's definitely not the experience in other Arab countries. So that was specific to Saudi Arabia at the time. We have a question here from Cookie. And Cookie says, what are the profound values that must be understood and valued difficult for most U.S. Americans to handle?
Oh, that's a great one. You know, for me, I think it's really, this almost sounds like I'm digging my own country a little bit, but it's really the relationship. I mean, that is really the profound value that I see, is they place so much value on relationship building, on family. And not that we don't do it here in the US, it's just different. And I think that if you don't grasp that and understand the true importance of it, it's really going to hinder you from being so successful. The great example of that is like with overtime.
Mm.
You know, here we think of overtime as an opportunity, a lot of us, to earn more money, if you're, you know, kind of thing, potentially, so that I can better prepare and give to my family. Whereas there, when you're doing overtime, that's asking them to give up family time, which is extremely important to them. So I think that's really what I come from, that is that just the strong sense of family and relationship there. Hope I answered that question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. We also had a question sent in by Donna, I believe, Judy. And the question was what?
We did have a question that was sent in a little bit before from Don, just to paraphrase. Is there a particular way to access leadership, particularly in Saudi Arabia? How do we find decision makers and that particular projects might need?
That's an excellent question. And Sandy, I'll start, and please chime in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for decisions, the decisions are made by the decision makers, and it's very hierarchical. Getting to the decision maker needs to have a lot of relationship building and understanding who's there, who are the players, and talking to a lot of people to find out who is the decision maker. If an organization or a firm or a company goes in and think that, hey, this person looks important enough that I will talk to him, and maybe he's the decision maker, they could be really wasting their time. So building relationships, getting information, talking to colleagues, spending time, and then identifying who is the real decision maker. Yeah. So your ticket to that is relationship building. Sandy, what would you like to add?
Yeah, no, I would add to that you're absolutely 100% correct, and it is relationship building. And sometimes you have to build relationships with someone who's not actually the decision maker to get to the decision maker, kind of things at times. But the one thing I'd tell you too is, if your sales process is normally, let's just say 6 months, automatically know it's going to take you a lot longer in the Middle East, because they are not going to do anything until they are comfortable and they feel that they can trust what you're saying, and that you're there kind of to not just make a sale, but be a part of something. I really believe that. And so it was not uncommon for us when we were there in the Middle East, and obviously it was the oil and gas industry, a sale that when the US, I could probably go out to Oklahoma or Texas or somewhere and do it in 6 months to a year. It would take me a couple of years there, or take their company a couple of years to really see the benefits of building that relationship.
Wonderful, thank you. There are a couple of questions. There's a question from Osama. Osama, welcome, we're glad you're here. I think you're calling from Germany. Is Saudi Arabia the benchmark when discussing Arab culture? Absolutely not. It is one culture within the Arab cultures. Again, there are values that are shared amongst the countries in the region, but Saudi Arabia tends to be the most conservative of them. And we are talking about Saudi Arabia today because a lot of Sandy's experience was in Saudi Arabia. But the whole wide Arab countries, you have Egypt with over 90 million people now. Some people say it's up to 100 million people, so it's a huge market. You have the Maghreb, Morocco, and Algeria and Tunis, where there's a lot of car manufacturing moving into that area. You have so many different opportunities in the marketplace, but again, today is because of Sandy's background and experience in that particular country. So hopefully that answered your question.
I would just say that just in my travels, you know, between the different countries. You could, I mean, it's just like traveling from, you know, east to west or north to south in the United States. You see the differences, you know, cultural differences. You're going to see that throughout the Middle East. If you went to the UAE versus Saudi Arabia, you know, even, you know, to some of the other countries there, Kuwait, there's you'll see those differences. And I always just say, make sure you're actually delving into that country that you're going into, and don't make an assumption that, oh, it's part of the Middle East, it's part of the Arab world, it's got to be the same, because that's not always the case.
Yes, absolutely. And then another question from Cookie. Cookie says, what are the subtle tendencies between Arab countries, Egypt as opposed to Saudi Arabia, for example? I love what she says next. She says Egyptians are known in the Arab world for their sense of humor. My background is Egyptian, so Cookie, thank you so much. I love the compliment. I appreciate it. There are differences. I mean, we're generalizing here between countries, but there are differences. There are differences, especially in the Gulf region, where the different countries are jockeying up for the leadership position. There are political differences. There are political not getting alongs, if you will, you know, the whole thing with Qatar right now. So there are so many differences between them all. And as we encounter, as we work with different businesses, we need to make them aware of that. An example, for example, between Morocco, and they speak French, and there's a strong French influence in Morocco. And so, you know, as we go into that area, we need to look at the nuances and work with our clients, et cetera, to understand that culture and the people that they're going to be working with. Sandy, would you like to add anything here?
No, I think you said it. I mean, I think that it all boils down, I can't say it enough, is just learning the culture of the country that you're going into, and be prepared to spend the time really building relationships with people.
Another question here, it says, can you go a bit more into the whys there are differences? And the comparison would be if we take Europe, for instance, and we would say, why are there differences between France and England and Portugal and Spain and all that? So if we look at the Arab world, it's also differences because of their different histories, right? Who occupied them? Who was there? Like for Egypt, it's the pharaohs who were there many, many years ago, and the long history there. For the Gulf region, they were in the desert. Morocco, Berbers, etc., in that area. So it's a cumulative history. It's what the country has gone through and what the people are doing with their backgrounds and the opportunities that they have. When we look at the Gulf region and the oil and gas that, you know, was discovered in the 1950s or so, and how that took those countries to present day. So it's history, it's economics, it's geography, a lot of different things that differentiates between countries. Sandy, would you like to add anything?
No, I think you did a great job there. I mean, it really is based on their history, and it could be the political situation. There's a lot of different things that determine the differences in those countries.
Right. So, do we have any other questions that we might have missed?
Evelyn had a question about having someone, does speaking Arabic make a difference? Does it make a difference to have someone on, and I'm going to take that to the next level. Does having someone who speaks Arabic on the team, on the American team going into Saudi Arabia or in a different Arab speaking country make a difference?
Yeah, it's a great question, Evelyn. Thank you.
Do you want me to take that, Soumaya?
Sandy, I don't think you had somebody who spoke Arabic there, right?
Right. No, we did not. And I found that we didn't really have any problems whatsoever, as long as you're willing to understand and try to just really understand their culture and build those relationships, then you don't really have the issues that you would think you would have. Certainly, I think that it's beneficial if you do have that, because that automatically eliminates one of the roadblocks, if you will, just being able to communicate with each other. But most of the people that we hired over in Saudi Arabia actually were bilingual. And so they spoke, even though it may be broken English. And they love the fact that you're willing to maybe just learn a few key words in Arabic. And once you build that relationship, then that person kind of takes you around and communicates for you. So not required, but nice to have, I'd say.
Right. And one of the things y'all did as well, Sandy, to show respect to the culture is you had all your business cards printed both in Arabic and in English, right?
We did. We not only, our contracts for our employees were in both English and Arabic, and then as well as our business cards were in both. When we went to events in Saudi Arabia, we made sure all of our marketing materials were available in Arabic as well.
Wonderful. And it really shows the sign of I care about your culture versus you don't speak English and I'm going to give it to you in Arabic. It's got a much, much deeper implication than just the communication piece. It's a big deal. How about hospitality? Talk to us about your experience there. And hospitality is a big deal across the Arab world. Talk to us about hospitality and what does it mean if somebody says, I'm inviting you for coffee or tea or to my house or to dinner, and then you say, no, thanks, I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to make it. What would that mean, and how did you handle that?
That would be considered very disrespectful and almost as if you are placing yourself above them and saying you're too good, to accept that offer. Like we mentioned earlier about being invited to the employee's home. Well, it was important to me because someone had invited me to their home. That's first of all. But secondly, it would have been almost a slap in the face, so to speak, because not only am I turning him down, and so from a business perspective, people look at that and go, oh, she wouldn't go have dinner with him. But also, they've told their families that this is coming. And so it's also an insult for their family as well. It's one of those things that you have to be prepared to do. A lot of times in the US, we're uncomfortable with certain things. We're uncomfortable really digging in and talking about our families. Here we practice in human resources, I even will say we need to keep some things separate, don't want to talk about certain things in the workplace. That's not the case there. Talking about your family and engaging and sitting and having a cup of coffee or going for tea or having dinner, that's part of that relationship building. And that's a critical piece to your success there. So you have to be willing to kind of shed that mindset and be willing to accept that and be open, because you can't be one way either. I can't be just, oh, tell me about your family. Tell me about this, tell me this. And when they ask you something or never want to share your family with them. I will tell you, it was very interesting. I told you the story earlier about I still keep in touch with the gentleman that invited me to dinner, but I thought it was very special. His mother-in-law, first of all, there was probably 14 people at that dinner, if I remember correctly. And my employee spoke broken English, and there was like an 8-year-old boy there that spoke English fairly well. And that was it. Everybody else spoke Arabic, but we got along great. And we were able to make it work. And his mother-in-law and I became so connected that she has since said that anytime I visit Saudi Arabia, I'm to stay in their home and never in a hotel, kind of thing. So
very nice.
Very much an honor.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. We have several questions here. One from Rama, and Rama says, do you think that the younger generation is westernized in terms of habits and ways of doing business? And how important is cultural variability in the Arab world? I'll take a stab at this here, Rama. And there are the younger generation, many of them have been educated in the US and Western countries, and they go back home. And what I have seen and observed is they might not be as culturally as ingrained as maybe their older generation, their parents' generation, etc. But all those things are still in them. I had a client not too long ago, and they went to do work in the UAE, and they went and saw all the skyscrapers and the people who were educated elsewhere, and they felt comfortable that, hey, it's Western enough, I don't need to know culture and understand their cultural practices. What happened then is one of them got actually imprisoned. And so that's when they realized that they really need to understand the culture. So just be very careful in terms of a perception that they're too Westernized now, and we can do business as in any Western country. Another question here also from Rama saying, speaking Algerian, Arabic, and trying to communicate with people in the UAE, for example, is almost comical, and I feel makes communication and relationship harder than just with English. And you're absolutely right. In terms of the UAE, been there many times. I think the language there is English because only 18% of the UAE actually are from the UAE, with 82% people from everywhere else. So I totally agree with you. Let's see here. There's a question from Cookie, and Cookie says, how do you work with Arab students in the US universities? Are there any intercultural advisors to do the universities seek out trainers? Curious as how the Arab students get along together. So I've had firsthand experience with Emory University here, where they brought in students from the Arab world to do masters, etc. And that particular program, they did provide cultural training because it was so different than where they came from. And so that was very successful. I know that a lot of international advisors deal with that, and they try to implement cultural training. And we have Stephanie Bibb here, who is part of our folks, and she does cultural training at a university in Montreal for them to understand US culture. So there are different ways of dealing with that all around. All right, a question here from Osama, and he says, which Arab countries are most business friendly in terms of ease of doing business with them? There are, if you Google that, there are reports that show you the friendliness of the different countries, and it depends on how you also define friendly. But just a lot of the Arab countries are very bureaucratic, so you need to be ready for that, and you also need to have the right people on your team from legal, etc., to guide you through the process. But it's you know, starting business anywhere is not that easy. I want to take a minute here, excuse me, and recognize Max Sutherland, who is with us, and Max is the president of the World Trade Center in Atlanta. Max, we're so glad you're here. Thank you for being here. There was another question that was sent in to us before we wrap up, and I think it was from Don as well. And Don wanted to, hello, Max, say hello to everyone. Hold on, let me unmute you real quick. All right.
Still muted.
On mute.
All right. Okay, there you are.
There we are. How is everyone today?
Doing
This
great, thanks.
Fascinating topic.
Thank you. Thank you. We're so glad you're here. We're very honored you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I had my video turned off, but I was kind of a bad hair day.
Well, we appreciate you. Thanks for being here. So a question came in on how to connect with people in the fields that you're interested in, and that particular question was in Saudi Arabia. I think it was, who was that from, Judy? I think it was from Don as well, right?
Yes, that was one of Don's questions.
Sure. So, connecting through organizations like the World Trade Center, like the Saudi and American Chamber of Commerce, like the U.S. Arab Bilateral Chamber out of Houston, all these organizations could put you in touch with organizations and individuals in the field of interest to you. So, encourage you to please reach out to them and get them to help you connect. All right.
That is just about our time, Soumaya. We are just a little bit before 2 o'clock, and I know that you had a couple of wrap-up things to. Sure.
So we just want to thank all of you for being here. I want to remind you that Khalifa Consulting is in Metro Atlanta area, and here is our email. and also phone number. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to work with you and help you to be successful in different cultures. Again, as Judy mentioned, we have consultants and trainers that cover the whole wide world, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, this morning, this evening. Again, we have people from all over the globe, and please drop us an email and let us know how we can help you or how you felt about today's webinar. We look forward to having a series of webinars about Arab cultures and other cultures as well, for us to open up our eyes and to be successful in our business as we expand. I know a lot of people look at different markets for expansion. When the market here in the US or other parts of the world is not doing that great, there is an opportunity elsewhere. Sandy, thank you so much for being with us today. It was an honor to have you. And thank you so much, Judy, as well, for facilitating our conversation. Looking forward to hearing from all of you soon. All right, see y'all later. Thank you so much.
Just to close it out, to let you know that we've recorded the session and it'll be available. We're going to email the links out to everyone as soon as we have the opportunity to do that. And again, thank you, Soumaya, and thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.